Want to start off by saying thank you to everyone who is attending and our panelists for joining us on this webinar, Beacon's third webinar about taxes. When I was a young girl, my dad always said the two inevitabilities of life are death and taxes. And now, as I'm an adult, I'm realizing that more keenly. And at the Beacon Center, we work to um, have accountability with government and taxes and your taxes. And we've seen a lot go on with taxes in Tennessee this year, from property taxes on the rise to looking at how our tax structure can be more comparative with other states. And that's what we want to talk about today with our panel of guests, who I will introduce briefly before we jump into our content. We have got the president and CEO of the Beacon Center, Justin Owen, here. He's going to give us kind of an overview of how things look in Tennessee. Patrick Gleason from Americans for Tax Reform. You can read his work. He's been a regular contributor on Forbes since 2014. You can read some of his work about Tennessee and how we compare to other states there, joining us to kind of give the comparative advantage look. And then who I think is the biggest celebrity in Nashville based on my Uber Eats habits, Carey Bringle, a business owner of the very successful Peg Leg Porker and Bringle Smoke and Oasis in my neighborhood, who kind of, and I'll come at this in a little bit, but kind of has his claim to fame speaking out against some of these tax increases in Nashville several years ago and has been outspoken ever since. So, gentlemen, thank you all so much for joining us today to talk about this issue that, whether we like it or not, is an inevitability and affects every single Tennessean, no matter where you live. Let's start off with, hate to call it an easy topic, but Justin, I want you to tell us a little bit about Tennessee's overall tax structure. We hear all the time, we see it on the U-Haul infographics that Tennessee is one of the top in-migration states, whether it's from California or Illinois or New York. People are moving to Tennessee and they often cite a favorable tax climate. Is that true? And if it is true, what kind of things contribute to that we need to be sure that we preserve to keep Tennessee strong?
Yeah, so it's a kind of a two-level issue in the state. You've got state tax policy and local tax policy that go hand in hand. Generally speaking, we're a pretty attractive state for taxpayers. We let them keep their hard-earned money. We not only refuse to impose an income tax, but we banned one in our state constitution. We have among the lowest overall tax burdens of any state in the nation. But the first problem with that, a good problem to have, is that states are competitive with one another. When you have laboratories of democracy, what North Carolina is doing, where Patrick lives, they're continuing to repeal taxes and cut taxes and reform their tax system to be more competitive with neighboring states like Tennessee. So we can't just sit around and not do anything about it. We actually have pretty high business taxes at the state level relative to other states and relative to our other tax policy. So that's something that we need to continue to address to remain competitive with other states. And then you have the local tax issues where we're not as friendly. And we've even heard this when we repealed our hall income tax on stocks and bonds several years ago. We'd go around and tout that to people. We got rid of the hall tax. And so many people would say, yeah, but as soon as you put that money right back in one pocket, my local government took it out of the other. And so what are you doing to limit local tax increases like property taxes? And so it's really a two-part process. How can we remain more competitive at the state level? And then how can we make sure that local governments are living that Tennessee way and letting taxpayers keep more of their hard-earned money as well?
I like that. Living the Tennessee way, keeping that hard-earned money. Patrick, Justin kind of hinted at this a little bit, spoiled it a bit, but you, in your capacity at Americans for Tax Reform, do work in a lot of different states. You see the competitive advantage that one state may have over another. Talk to us about why Tennessee, why, if you think we have a competitive advantage
Mm,
compared to maybe your home state of North Carolina, or what's it going to take for us to keep that or get that competitive edge?
yeah. So there's no denying, as Justin alluded to, that Tennessee has among the lowest overall average state and local tax burdens. But the problem is, and the key for lawmakers to keep in mind in Tennessee, and why it's not time to rest on laurels, is all the competing states surrounding them are seeking to gain track or gain ground on Tennessee and get surpast them. And so it's been interesting the last decade. even more than the last decade, but at least the last decade, Tennessee policymakers should feel pretty flattered. If they say imitation is the highest form of flattery, the most dominant state tax policy trend period over the last decade has been the mass movement of states across the country seeking to join Tennessee and Texas and the other no income tax states in that club, in that 8-member club of no income tax states. Tennessee's that advantage is a diminishing advantage as more states join that club. We've had a handful of states for the first time ever in recent years enact legislation that is phasing out their income taxes and putting them on the path to zero. So Mississippi, Kentucky, Arkansas has enacted 3 income tax cuts in the last few years. Sarah Huckabee Sanders wants to get to zero by the end of her governorship. In South Carolina, nearby South Carolina, you've got every top contender for governor has committed to putting their state on the path to zero. And actually, the state Senate is taking up a state House passed version in South Carolina of a tax reform bill that would phase them out to zero. And Georgia, Lieutenant Governor, who's going to be like the next governor, is running on a plan to phase out their income tax. So again, it's diminishing advantage. So that's why it's important lawmakers not rest on their laurels. And business taxation, if you look at the areas where there is room for improvement, certainly business taxation. I mentioned other states are looking to take away that advantage of no income tax states by joining Tennessee in that club. But you look next door at North Carolina, not only are they getting their income tax at least to 2.49, but closer to zero, their corporate tax is certainly going to be zero. That's codified law by the end of this decade. So North Carolina will have no corporate income tax. They have a franchise tax they're phasing down, but that's it. And that'll likely soon be phased out too. So you got that competition to keep in mind. So in this era of heightened tax competition, in this golden era of tax reform, in large part because states are seeking to copy Tennessee, it's important that lawmakers not rest on the laurels. And that's why I'm excited lawmakers are looking at areas. Actually, the good news is lawmakers are not resting on their laurels, whether it's Governor Lee or legislators are looking at ways to improve the code. And I know we're going to talk about it some more today, whether it's particularly property tax relief and the need for that and limitation, or it's business tax relief. I know we're going to talk about that, but those seem, from my standpoint, to be the 2 areas where lawmakers, if they focused on next year and prioritized, they would be addressing the most in-need areas and ensuring that Tennessee stays ahead of the game and remains kind of the model for fiscal policy. So just general trend-wise, that's what we're seeing, kind of how Tennessee fits into that context.
Well, we are going to knock Tennessee just a little bit here in a bit from some ways that we're straggling, but it's nice to hear that we are leading and others are riding our coattails in other areas. Carrie, you're kind of the boots on the ground guy out here. You own businesses, you own property, you have to deal probably with tax accountants here, there, and everywhere to deal with the tax burden that is placed upon you in your businesses. What is your perspective on how Tennessee's tax structure is? Is there another state that you're like, man, I really should have gone and opened my businesses there? Are you happy here? What can we do to keep businesses like yours sustainable and growing and thriving?
Well, so I'm a native Nashvilleian. I was born and raised here, and so I love having a business here in Nashville and in Tennessee. My family settled in Tennessee in 1827, down in West Tennessee in Covington. But the tax issue for me is a very real one. For business owners like me, it's a very real one, and it's not just for business owners like me that own property. It's also for business owners that are on triple net leases, because it affects them as well. And that's what a lot of people don't think about. They think, well, you don't own the property, it's not your problem. Well, yes, it is their problem. And in fact, it can be more their problem than it is my problem, because there's some things that I can do that can help negate some of those costs. But to give you an example, when I opened Peg Leg Porker in 2013, my property taxes were, I think, $9,900. I've been on that property now the entire time. We did do an addition, but we've pumped millions into the neighborhood, and now our taxes sit at $77,000 a year. And that's just Peg Leg Porker. Over at the Bringle Smoking Oasis, those property taxes have, I believe, doubled. At our tasting room, I believe they've doubled this last year. I've been on the same property with my house for 20 years. And this last year, my wife and I built a new house after a lot of years of hard work and living in a much smaller house. And my property taxes here at my new house quadrupled. So they went up 400%. So these are not sustainable. And to advocate for other businesses, we're lucky we have a national following and international following, so we get a lot of business, which helps us to be able to pay these taxes. But it doesn't hurt any less. It These are the equivalent of multiple full-time employees that we could be hiring, and getting the revenue from their tax, and from more sales tax. But you've got other owners like down on Broadway, and all the owners on Broadway are not the big, huge TC restaurant groups with the Morgan Wallens and the Jason Aldeans. That's not everything that's on Broadway. Your original Broadway owners that have been there for 30 years, somebody like Layla, they just got levied with tax bills that will make your head spin. I'm talking about a $500,000 tax bill for 1 year of property tax on a building that, say, one of those owners might have paid $50,000 for 30 years ago, and has been running a business there from when Broadway was not so desirable to now that it is. And they've maintained a local presence with local ownership, and now they're getting just absolutely waylaid. And it's really frustrating from an owner standpoint, because when you have blighted areas like the Gulch was when I moved in, and like Broadway was when somebody like Layla moved in, um, and you pump millions into those neighborhoods, and you create hundreds of jobs, and you generate, hundreds of thousands in sales tax, liquor tax, everything that goes along with it. You really feel betrayed by the city when they punish you for creating prosperity, for expanding a neighborhood, for subsidizing the infrastructure. And, a lot of people want to say, when I spoke out last time, I got attacked by a former editor of the Nashville scene. And he was like, what Carey's not telling you is that his tax dollars, unlike everybody else's, stay in his neighborhood. Well, that was a lie. So there is a thing called the downtown business district, and there was at the time the GBID, which was the Gulf Business Improvement District. And what people need to understand that they don't know is that in the GBID, in the downtown business district, the business owners in those districts, which are now just one, pay extra money. And so we pay above and beyond the regular property tax that's levied on the Nashville businesses outside of the district. And that money goes to pay for special services in our district. So the rest, our regular tax dollars go just like everybody else's. They're spread amongst the city, and they benefit everybody. We pay an extra percentage that stays in our neighborhood, that keeps the streets clean, that keeps the neighborhood safe. And so we don't get to keep all of our tax dollars. That's a misnomer, and it's a lie. We pay extra to have tax dollars stay in our neighborhood. But you're gonna, as I wrote, 4 or 5 years ago, I predicted that we were going to lose local treasures, and sure enough, we have. We've lost 5 or 10 of them that you would have never thought would ever close in your lifetime. They were quintessential Nashville businesses, and they've said, we're out of here. And when we start taking these tax dollars from local business owners, and it benefits big national players rather than the local people, and we don't protect our local businesses, then we take away what made Nashville famous in the first place, what made it attractive in the first place. When you start to lose the Arnolds, the Rotiers, if you lose the Peg Leg Porkers, if you lose the other very few local independently owned businesses that are still around, then you've lost the heart and soul of the city, and we will see the city decline very rapidly when you lose that element of what has always made Nashville a wonderful place to be.
When you say the words loose peg leg pork, you're gonna make me cry or have a nightmare about it. I just want you to know, like, don't do that to me in my state. We're gonna actually circle back to some of the things that you said because you really touched a lot there on the property tax issue. And I think that that's the issue that is on a lot of people's minds because whether you're an owner of a home, a renter of a home, an owner of a business, if you live in Tennessee in one of these localities that has raised property taxes over the last year, which is a lot, or over the last 5 years even, you have felt the sting and the burden that the fact that Tennessee is one of only 4 states that does not have any kind of mechanism to cap unrestricted, unrestrained, unlimited property tax growth, you have felt the sting of that. It's something that Beacon has worked on a whole lot, and that's why I want to kick it over to Justin first to talk about this issue because we hear from all of our uh, partners in other states, like they see that Tennessee is all these localities are raising property taxes by this amount and that amount, and they're like, "What is going on over there?" And it's a head scratcher for all of us. So, Justin, talk to us about this out of control property tax issue and the policy behind it, and what we can do to restrain some of this.
Well, first of all, kind of big picture, Carrie's exactly right. It's not government that creates value and jobs and opportunity and rejuvenates neighborhoods. It's our small businesses. And we have to remember that from the outset. Government ain't making the best world's best ribs and chicken wings. And by the way, just a bit of an aside, last time we interviewed Carrie, we got to eat chicken wings live on air. So shame on you, Taylor and Kylie, for not making that happen this time as well. Next time I expect some wings out of this.
I already said he's saved in the top of my Uber Eats, so like we can see what we can do here soon.
But probably the most insidious tax when it comes to destroying wealth and growth and opportunity is local property taxes. And people will be surprised to know that Tennessee is one of only 4 states that have no limit whatsoever on property tax increases. Local governments can raise property taxes as much as they want with reckless abandon without any check by voters. And you say, oh, well, they get have to face reelection. Oftentimes they vote in these in year one of their term and they got 4 years before they're up for reelection. That's a long time to hold somebody accountable. And by then it's too late. And so when we go and talk to people, the housing issue, ability to afford housing, buy a starter home, move into a bigger home when you have kids, all of those decisions are made more and more difficult because local governments have no restraint on their ability to raise property taxes. Here in Nashville, as Carey said, as his taxes have gone up not only because of the value of his property going up, but because our local government has raised taxes here over 50% over the course of 5 years. And that's not even the highest, unfortunately. There are cities and counties that are raising taxes about even greater amounts, and there are no responsible safeguards for taxpayers. Many taxpayers would just like to get rid of property taxes altogether, and I can't blame them. It's a terrible tax. You never really own your property in that sense. But what we've proposed is we understand that local governments rely heavily on property taxes to make their budgets, to provide those local services. Let's just give taxpayers a say. You can raise property taxes by, say, 2% without putting it to a vote, but anything over that triggers a referendum, so voters must approve those tax increases. If you want to make the case that you need to increase police and fire and need more funding to fix potholes or whatever it is, then go for it. Go make that case to your local property owners and renters and taxpayers. And that's the other issue with property taxes. They impact everybody. Obviously, if you own a home, as Carrie has showed, if you own a business, but renters too are impacted by this. Those tax increases are passed on to them. So everybody should care about what these increases are doing to the individual families and their ability to meet a budget. And so we expect them to live within their means. We can expect our local governments to live within their means as well.
Amen. I totally agree. Patrick, back to you kind of for the
Mm.
comparative advantage question again. One of four states. Tennessee's one of four states. We're not in good company, by the way, of other states whose policies we would want to emulate, being one of four states that has no method to protect taxpayers from these exorbitant property tax increases. What are some examples that Tennessee should strive to follow? Or what would you do if you were in charge here, based on what you've seen in other states, that Tennessee should do? Because, like I mentioned before, we might be leading in the income tax issue, but we are straggling on the property tax issue.
Yeah, well, given the fact that most of the country, most of the states around the country have some form of property tax limitation, whether it's statutory or constitutional, there's a lot of examples to learn from, things that are good, worth adopting, or things that could be improved upon. And I would mention, before I highlight a few examples, I mentioned, the past decade, income tax phase out efforts have been the dominant policy trend, states seeking to be like Tennessee, but that has finally gotten some competition in the past year, and that is coming from property tax relief and calls for that, and needs calls for property tax restraint. And it's not limited just to Tennessee, actually, but there is a common trend. We've seen it in other no income tax states where this has become a dominant concern really in the past year and a half. So you got in Florida, you got Ron DeSantis calling for a constitutional amendment next year to put property taxes on the path to phase out. Meanwhile, in Texas, another no income tax state, they do have a form of limitation on the books that could be a model to adopt if they fix some of the flaws, which I'll mention. But Governor Greg Abbott is running for re-election right now and into next year, and he's running the feature component of his re-election campaign as a six-pillar property tax relief package, among which is a limitation in how much they can grow, and also a requirement that they be put to voters. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about and urging Tennessee lawmakers to consider is what actually Governor Greg Abbott's going to be running on in Tennessee. And Texas is a state that has copied Tennessee in many respects. They copied Tennessee's great, commendable constitutional prohibition on income tax. They thought that was a great idea. They copied that a couple of years later. But there's actually some things where Tennessee could look at copying Texas. And so if you look at, I would highlight, they are one of the states that have a limitation on the books, has been referred to as the rollback rate or the voter approved tax rate. Both of those terms have been applied to it. In the past, it was pretty high. It was above 7%. But back in 2019, they tightened it to 3.5% for most revenue. For school revenue is 2.5. And what that does is says those revenue streams for localities cannot grow, for most revenue streams for localities cannot exceed 3.5% annual growth. For school districts, cannot exceed 2.5% annual growth. If local officials want to keep revenue collected in excess of that, if they don't want to refund it to taxpayers or adjust the rate so that they don't collect that, they just have to ask voter approval. So it's a voter approval requirement. The reason why property tax relief and limitation is still a need in Texas is because this limit has a few flaws that prevent it from being the optimal limitation feature. One of them is it doesn't apply to new development. So when they tightened it up in 2019, it didn't apply to any new development or construction. So over time, you have a greatly diminishing safeguard from that. The other problem is it doesn't apply to every stream of revenue that contributes to the overall property tax burden. So very special districts, a lot of water districts were exempted, and then it had a little too generous, too liberal of a natural disaster exemption, would override it for a year. So it's saved taxpayers in Texas billions, nearly 20 billion since 2019, since they tightened it up. So compared to what they would have had with the higher rollback rate, but it still is insufficient. And so that's why in Texas, you see it's kind of been like Groundhog Day there for the past few sessions. This has been the top need on the tax policy side is getting property tax limitation. They've taken bites at the apple. They've increased the homestead exemption. They've done a few things here and there, but they still don't have an ultimate solution. And so, not only the voter approval requirement in Abbott's property tax relief package that I think is a great idea worth emulating in other states and in Tennessee, but he has would limit property tax, all local revenue growth, and thereby limit property tax growth at 3.5% or inflation, whichever is lesser. The Texas's lieutenant governor just came out and endorsed. He has some key differences in his property tax relief proposal, but he also endorsed such a local spending limit. And ultimately, what I would just say is a big takeaway from seeing various proposals and various ways to go about it around the country. A lot of states, some states have assessment caps, which better than the status quo, but then you create some other problems there with various disparities over time. So that's not really the optimal way to go. But a local spending cap limiting local revenue, and also a voter approval requirement to have local collections exceed a certain growth rate, such as the one that Beacon Center has proposed, are certainly ways that would provide significant property tax restraint, would allow more certainty for businesses who need to plan, but also for households. And I would just mention, this is an area where it's sort of a victim of your own success dynamic with, Mr. Bringle is being a victim of his business's own success. He's now getting punished for it. And in such an exorbitant growth in property tax bill, also he's getting punished for also helping his overall neighborhood too. Likewise, Tennessee lawmakers at the state level have established such a relatively attractive tax climate, all things considered. You attract so many people, you help attract new businesses, people to the state. Those drive up property tax values too. So it's a victim of your own success problem, and that's why you see it in states that have been successful from a state level policy standpoint, big picture. So that's why this is a similar problem in Texas, Florida, other states that have been getting so many key things right, certainly at the state level. And that's in North Carolina, likewise, I mentioned earlier. Their speaker just came out just this week and formed a commission to come up with some recommendations for limiting property taxes in North Carolina, because like we've seen in Nashville and Chattanooga and other communities around Tennessee, same thing has been happening in Raleigh and Charlotte and other communities around there. They've been getting hit with massive property tax increases in recent years. So it's contributed to that demand. Fortunately, in Tennessee, you already don't have an income tax, so it's not a competing priority like it is, say, in North Carolina, where they're looking at doing this. So that's why, while this is probably emerging and competing with income tax phasing out as the new dominant tax policy trend nationwide, there's more reason to address it in Tennessee than most states. One, you already don't have an income tax, so it's not a competing priority. And two, you've got a state legislature that can do something about it. And really, again, I'll close just remarks here and be quiet by just pointing out, at the end of the day, this is a function of local spending. And so I kind of feel a little bit bad for governors and gubernatorial staff and legislators and their staff who are fielding a lot of complaints from people about property tax burdens, when primarily they should complain to their city council members, county commissioners, mayors, and the like. That said, there is reason to bring this up with legislators, because there are things legislators can do to put some restraint on localities, whether it's their spending, requiring voter approval for growing beyond a certain threshold, or ideally both, like Beacon Center is talking about. So that's kind of what we're seeing based on some lessons learned and what's worked and not worked around the country, and kind of why Tennessee, more so than other states, really is ripe for addressing this.
You're absolutely right, and I'm totally going to butcher this, but Justin says a lot that it's not a not enough funds issue. It's a local government overspending issue that we're dealing with and seeing. And I'll probably kick it back to him for a little bit after I talk to Carey. But Carey, back a few years ago in 2020, when Nashville first considered a property tax increase during the height of COVID, I was very familiar with Peg Leg Porker, but I wasn't familiar with you until you issued that open letter to the leadership of Nashville saying, hey, something's got to give here. This isn't going to work. This 34% property tax increase, this ain't going to work, especially during COVID. What prompted you to first speak up? And if you have anything else to add about, maybe the nightmare fuel that you saw coming down the pipes with the 34% property tax increase that caused you to speak up, and just the importance of predictability with your business and predictability and expenses, and why when these massive property tax hikes come into play, they kind of send you for a loop, and it makes it really hard for you guys.
Well, it does, and the reason that I wrote that was to educate our customers and to educate the general public, because as a small business owner, these things, you see them, you live them, but our customers had no idea. And so when I published that letter and showed people the hard numbers and told them what was going on, they were like, wow. They're like, my property tax is going up $200 at my house, but I had no idea yours was going up tens of thousands at the same time. And, no wonder it's hard to make a living as a small independent business owner in Nashville. And, the thing is, as we saw those increases, we saw services diminish. It used to be that we didn't have potholes in Nashville. TDOT prided itself on having the best roads in the state. NDOT did a good job. We used to have mayors that no matter what side of the aisle they were on, they were fiscally responsible. And then we started seeing a lot of stuff that I think the leadership thought was great and thought was going to make Nashville the it city. But, things like TIF financing that they did with the former convention center. They gave it away for $5 million. That property is now worth $800 million with the Fifth and Broad site on it, probably more like $1.2 billion at this point. We gave it away for $5 million, and then we turned around and built them a $40 million parking garage. And so those types of decisions, new stadiums, not negotiating the old stadium to where the owners had to maintain it rather than the city. And so then the owners come back and go, oh, it's going to cost us $1.2 billion to do it. We might as well just build a new one. And so it's things like that the general public, if they don't have to deal with it on a daily basis, don't understand. And I'll give you a prime example. Our new transit plan, that is not a plan to reduce traffic. It is a plan for bike lanes and for crosswalks. In fact, it has disintegrated the traffic patterns in a lot of areas. Say the roundabout on Division, where it used to have 2 lanes, it got backed up every afternoon at rush hour about a half a mile. Now it gets backed up about a mile because they took one of those lanes out for a bike lane. And, NDOT has been grossly mismanaged. And a lot of people don't know that. I don't know if people know, I've talked about it some, but the general public's not aware that they've created zones in downtown. And with this outsourced parking, they've metered everything. All of the meters have gone to 24/7, 365. It used to be you got free parking on the weekends. You got free parking after 5 or 6 o'clock. Now you get no free parking at all. They won't line the street because they say every bit of the street you have to pay. And then they've created these zones and they have limitations on the zone. So if you come to Peg Leg Porker and you spend 2 hours at lunch and you pay the meter like you're supposed to, nobody has a problem. If you come back at night to go to Rudy's Jazz Room and see a 4-hour show, after your first 2 hours, the meter locks you out and you're not able to extend your time on that meter. And you're locked out of the zone for the 24-hour period. And a lot of native Nashvillians and even new Nashvillians have no idea that this is going on. There's no logic behind it. It doesn't help turn the cars. It doesn't create more revenue for the city. It's just a nuisance. And it's a hindrance to small businesses like mine who have customers that have to get up out of their seat and leave your business because their parking is expired and the city won't let them extend it. And so that's why I wrote the letter then. That's why I speak out now. Like I said, we're able to pay the tax. We don't like it. It makes us think about moving to other municipalities. But there's a lot of businesses that aren't nearly as fortunate as we are, that simply cannot afford to stay in business in Nashville under this current tax burden. And these are businesses that you'd know and love, but you just never thought about them in that way. They're hurting. They're worried. It's a stress. And I've watched people that went through COVID that then, thought they had sold their property, closed their business, reopened back up. And while all that was going on, they had a stroke from the stress. And it's not sustainable. And like Justin said, this is a spending problem. This is not a revenue problem. Nashville has more revenue than it has ever had in the existence of the city. We have had a boom unlike most cities in the United States will ever see. And we just can't stop putting our hand in the cookie jar and eating all the cookies. The state is the most fiscally responsible state in the country with the least amount of tax burden on any resident. We beat Florida. Florida tried to claim it, and Jack Johnson had to stand up and say no. Ours is 400 to 600 per citizen, and so our state has done a tremendous job. But our city just cannot stop spending money that we've had it, but we don't have it, and it's taking things like emergency COVID funds that were a big flood and saying we want to make those permanent rather than, hey, guess what? That was a temporary band aid for a temporary problem. That problem's gone. The band aid has to be ripped off. And we got to get back to the fiscal responsibility that we need to be as a city. And I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. We've got an opportunity now with the city council's going to be shrunk down to 20, and that will give us a big opportunity to change leadership there, to try and find some more fiscally responsible candidates. But we cannot continue on the path that we're on, or we're going to start to see the decline that cities like Austin are starting to see because of the headache or the hangover from the partying the night before.
We believe a lot in individual responsibility, and I know we say a lot of times that if a family's got to answer to a budget, the government should have to too, because they get their money from us. They're not creating revenue, they're getting it from us. And so spot on, Carey. Justin, I feel like I do this all the time because Justin's my boss. What do we do? I'm always asking Justin, what do we do? But what do we do? What can state lawmakers do? Because it's clear that local lawmakers, they ain't stopping. So what can we do from the state level?
Well, that's what we've learned from other states that have limitations is they're not self-imposed by local governments. Local governments are going to continue to try every way they can, whether it's through property taxes or, as Carey said, parking meters to generate revenue to pay for their pet projects. And while generally speaking, the government that's closest to the people is best, there still is a role for the state legislature. All of these local cities and counties are subdivisions of the state, and the legislature has a responsibility to protect our economy as a whole and to set some standards for things like this. We already vote on local wheel taxes. We already vote on local sales tax increases. We should allow voters to also have a vote on property tax increases. And it's the legislature that needs to set that tone and set that expectation across the state. So people see this. As much as local government is best, sometimes local government is worse because you see the harm done by that in your communities, in your neighborhoods. And what people are seeing is their taxes go up and that pothole's still not getting filled. Their lane is shrinking because of those bike lanes. Like they are facing the crunch of that and not seeing the benefit of it. And as we've polled this issue over time, routinely, this is so popular. Limiting local property taxes, like I said, even banning property taxes is more popular than keeping things the way they are. So what gives? Well, sadly, legislators tend to be, in certain instances, lagging indicators of the public. The public is all for something, and it takes state legislators a long time to come around. And this is one of those issues, mainly because those legislators are getting an earful from the taxpayer-funded lobbyists hired by those local governments to keep the status quo. Those local governments raise your property taxes and then turn around and spend, in Nashville's case, $200,000 a year, across the state, millions of dollars a year to hire influential lobbyists to go up to the legislature and fight against their interests. And so you create this perpetual cycle of doing nothing. And it's incumbent upon legislators to recognize what's happening, to realize that they need to be listening to their constituents who are paying these tax bills rather than the local government officials who are spending the money, and side with their constituents, the taxpayers. And as we said earlier, what we've proposed is extraordinarily reasonable. You can still raise property taxes if you convince your local citizens that that's necessary, but there's some accountability that needs to be put into place that we don't have now as a state. And if we don't do something about it, not only is Nashville going to start its decline as a city, but the state as a whole is going to decline because we're rotting from within under the guise that we are this low tax, friendly place for business and individuals to keep their hard-earned money. except in their local communities. And that's just not the way we need to head as a state. And one of the biggest things we can do to protect what has made Tennessee great is to limit local property taxes, just like we have limitations on our state's ability to raise our taxes as well.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but I'm fired up. I want to do something about property taxes after that. Thank you, Justin. Thanks, guys, for that. I want to move on to another topic, even though I feel like we could talk about the property tax issue all day long, and people want us to talk about it all day long because it's the one issue that I get the most emails in my inbox about. Y'all got to do something about this. We could talk about it all day, but while we have Carey here, I wanted to talk about some other business tax reforms that would be really great for Tennessee. Justin, I'm going to come to you first for a little overview of this. There were some federal tax credits that have happened that really benefited Tennessee business owners. And I want you to explain those to the people because, full disclosure, I had to have him explain them to me not that long ago. But just give us a quick overview of the tax cuts that have happened, how they benefit businesses, and then I'm going to come to you, Carey, for a practical example. But I think that there are some very nuanced things that Tennessee can do to permanently cement some of these temporary tax cuts or temporary tax changes that would be great for us and for business owners in the future.
Yeah, we studied this issue now probably 2 years ago. As I mentioned at the outset, we are in a really good spot as a state with state level taxes, except for our business taxes. They need some work to remain competitive with other states. One of the best things we can do is address this full expensing issue. And it sounds really wonky, an accounting term, but what it really means, and what happened with the 2017 Trump tax cuts, and then again this year with the One Big Beautiful Bill, was that the Fed said if you buy machinery or a tractor if you're a farmer, or in Carrie's cases, a smoker to cook those delicious ribs,
Mm.
you can write off that big expense up front so that you get the tax benefit um, in 1 year, in the same year that you make that big expense, rather than having to spread that tax benefit out over 5, 10, however many years. And so there is no real harm to local or to the state government, in this case, the federal government, for doing this because they're still going to get their taxes. They're just going to get them in different years. And so there's no revenue impact of this. It's just a matter of when they get that revenue. But it's a huge opportunity for businesses. It encourages them to invest in equipment and machinery and upgrades. It gives them the flexibility to do so. And so when we've talked to businesses and groups like the Chamber of Commerce, this has been a real big issue. And it's one of the best things that the government can do without foregoing revenue. And so that's why the feds have done it twice now. When they did it in 2017, the state came along and said, we're going to match that and we're going to give you the same tax benefits as a state as the feds do. Unfortunately, we didn't do that this time or haven't done that yet. And so we're calling on state lawmakers to do the same, essentially recognize that the federal tax policy is the way to go and give them that same benefit at the state level. Carey, you can probably give a better example of this in a real world setting of how this impacts businesses. So I would like for you to do that because I feel like even my attempt at not being wonky failed.
No, that was good. It helps me every time you explain it. But Carey, go ahead.
I think that you hit it on the head, Justin. The Section 179 deduction is huge at 100%. It it allows business owners like me to say, all right, before the end of the year, I'm going to buy this. I'm going to buy a new truck, a new catering van. I'm going to buy a new smoker. I'm going to invest more in my business, which can create more jobs, which drives revenues for other industries. Just nationwide as a whole, it's great for American-made products. It's just great for business all around. That ability to write it off the year that you buy it and negate a lot of taxes because of that is huge. And the thing is, when as a business owner, you look at it and you say, all right, if my tax burden is going to be, $400,000 that I'm sending to the federal government, which I'm not happy about, I feel like it's going to nothing, and it's going to go into thin air because I'll never see any of it again. Then the inverse of that is okay, but if I can go buy a $200,000 piece of equipment, well, now I'm buying something from another business who's going to benefit. It's going to help me expand my business operations, which is going to help me benefit. It's probably going to create some more jobs, not only for my business, but for the other business that I buy it from. And now my tax burden is reduced to the federal government because instead of giving that money to Uncle Sam to spend on God knows what, now I'm giving it to another business. I'm able to take the deduction and invest it into myself and my business that I know is going to create jobs. And it just, other than being a great tax policy, it's a feel good policy for a business owner to feel better about the money that you're earning because business owners want to invest. They want to create more. If you're a natural entrepreneur, you want to keep going. When the federal government de-incentivizes you to keep going because the more you grow, the more you get taxed, then that's when business grinds to a halt. And so deductions like this are tantamount to businesses thriving in their communities. The other thing that they did during the first administration was opportunity zones, and they don't get talked about nearly enough. They were a massive economic boom for the United States and for rural areas that were blighted that needed investment. These are the types of policies, these business friendly policies that we need to have not only nationwide, but in our state and in our city government. So not just at a state level, but also at a city level. And these are the things that help businesses thrive and continue to create jobs.
Anything to keep Peg Leg Porker growing. If y'all can't tell, I'm a huge fan. I think I've said it like 7 times on this call. Patrick, I know that y'all have it at Americans for Tax Reform. Y'all got some resources that you've either dropped or are dropping to address this. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, we're compiling testimonials of businesses that are highlighting benefits of the expensing provisions, particularly in the tax bill and the big beautiful bill signed into law on July 4th. ATR.org/expensing is where you can find that. But ATR.org/Tennessee is also where we have some Tennessee specific facts and Tennessee specific testimonials of businesses that have pointed to the tax bill and the tax cuts. And it might not just be the expensing provisions, but ATR.org/Tennessee also highlights businesses in Tennessee that are highlighting other components of the bill that have allowed them to do things like expand their operations, hire new workers, give raises to existing workers. So yeah, those are those resources I'd like to highlight, ATR.org/expensing and ATR.org/list. And I'll be certainly following up with Mr. Bringle because we'd love to include Peg Leg in that. And, I was also, echo some of the points you made. Peg Leg was my go-to barbecue place even before I saw Mr. Bringle's article in fighting that exorbitant property tax, like the 34% a few years ago. So I was so thrilled when I saw him step up and voice his opposition to that because that was already my go-to place. And so it just made me more thrilled about my decision there. And it's an honor to be with you here too as well. But yeah, so we have those resources as well, and it's great to hear real world examples of how this is benefiting businesses from Mr. Bringle because one of the reasons why we're offering these new resources, and we're adding to them is because we are trying to encourage members of Congress and candidates and the administration to focus more on the expensing provisions that are in the tax bill. Because if you look at the economic projections, done by outfits across the ideological spectrum, also by the nonpartisan scorekeepers in the government, they showed that the expensing provisions are the most economic growth inducing aspect of the big beautiful bill. And so I get why the no tax on tips and the overtime stuff is getting a lot of attention, but the expensing provisions are actually the most economic growth inducing pieces of that. So that and avoiding the income tax rate hikes that were scheduled to hit individuals and businesses, small businesses at the end of the year were huge. But so that's why it's so great to hear folks talk about expensing. And that's why we've launched those resources so we can compile those and help people better understand that these expensing provisions allow businesses increase their hiring capacity, increase their pay raising capacity, increase their capacity to expand in their own business, which is good for the community overall. So yeah, it's great to hear a concrete example here of that. And so that's why we're highlighting that. And hopefully we'll see more members of Congress started doing that as well, because it's not being done sufficiently so far. And we'd be really remiss if we don't take advantage of this opportunity to explain the benefits of this to the public.
How exciting. We love to hear about something that is good that the government's doing that's going to help small business owners. You don't hear about that often, so we love to hear about it. I'm going to kick it over to Justin for one more rant here as we close out. The professional privilege tax is something that's not talked about that often, and I don't think it's talked about often enough, but then again, I will rant about taxes all day long if you'll let me. Um, a lot of professions don't have to pay a professional privilege tax. It's kind of like the last little remnant of an income tax. It only applies to certain professions in Tennessee. The way I see it, it's not super fair. That's my opinion. But Justin, tell us about the professional privilege tax. What what are the implications for some of these professionals in Tennessee who are having to pay the government to do their job? And what can we do about it? And Patrick, feel free to drop in if you have anything to add to that too.
Well, I love a good rant, but I know it's the last thing keeping us between Q and A, so I'll keep it short. As you said, this professional privilege tax is the last remnant of an income tax in our state. And it's ridiculous that as a state, we think we can charge people money for the privilege to work. Carey has said this, that you know what? We should not be punishing companies from growing and providing jobs and opportunities. We should be rewarding that. And income taxes, like the professional privilege tax, do just the opposite. It was a $400 tax that was applied to, I think, 20 some odd different professions, from doctors to accountants, lawyers, a bunch of others. Over the years, those groups got to the legislature and convinced them to take it away for doctors, take it away for accountants. Unfortunately, it still exists for lawyers, lobbyists, and stockbrokers, because they're the most hated professions of us all. And so, as a both a lawyer and a lobbyist, I remember at my sister's nursing school graduation, her dean stood up and said how amazing it is for all of these kids to be joining the most honorable and respected profession in America, as nurses, unlike people on the other end, like lawyers and lobbyists. And my whole family slow turned and stared at me when she said that. And so it's very difficult for the remaining professionals to convince legislators that, hey, we shouldn't be taxed either. But at the end of the day, I don't care what profession you're in, you should not be charged by government for the quote unquote privilege of working. And we don't have an income tax in Tennessee. We banned it in our Constitution. It's high time to eliminate the last income tax that we have in this state, and eliminate the professional privilege tax for everybody, even if we don't like the professionals who are paying it.
Anything to add there, Patrick? That was a good rant. I'll give you like a 10 out of 10 on that one. I've heard a lot of Justin rants. That was a great one.
No, I would just add, aside from, the lack of a property tax limit or restraint, this is the one other area where, in the few rare, good news is these are rare, where Tennessee is a negative outlier, and not a state where actually places are trying to copy. So this is one of the rare outliers. I'm so glad Beacon is still focused on this. Americans for Tax Reform is still going to be focused on this. I was really worried back when they got rid of that large tranche of professions, and that we were left with the least politically sympathetic group still being taxed. I was worried it was going to be really tough to do, and it certainly is. But it's still, as Justin mentioned, it's the last vestige of an income tax. I'm not going to say Tennessee needs an asterisk again like it did for the hall tax. I wouldn't do that. That win was hard fought enough, and it really doesn't deserve that. But let's just go ahead and get rid of it and make it clean. And that's what I would say. So we're going to be focused on that Americans tax reform, and I'm glad Beacon is still focused on it.
I like the way you think, Patrick. Well, like Justin said, we're coming up on time. I wanted to get to some questions, but I've got one question that I think would be really good for us to end on. And I wanted Carey to address this anyway, but I'm going to let all three of y'all hit it, and I'm going to come to you last, Carey. So we'll go Justin, Patrick, Carey, like we have been. But for Tennesseans who are interested in tax reform, whether that be business tax, property tax, professional privilege tax, just tax reforms in general, What's the most effective way to stay engaged and to contribute to this conversation and to contribute what you have your voice to this discussion?
The best way is just to show up and make your voice heard. You can do that in a lot of ways. I don't bemoan anybody for not wanting to go to city council meetings, but show up, make your voice heard. Even if you don't show up at the meetings themselves, call your elected officials, text them, email them, make your voice heard because I promise you, especially with the property tax issue, the other side's doing it. There's somebody on the other side that's spending a lot of time and energy talking to these policymakers, and they're only really getting one side of it. And so if you go to our website at beacontn.org and sign up for our emails, you'll see ways to engage on this, and we'll let you know when there are opportunities to make your voice heard, especially as we come up on the legislative session that starts in January. That's a key time to make your voice heard with state policymakers. But don't just do it then. Talk to your legislators every chance you get about this stuff. Tell them your stories. Let them know how these policies impact you, including your local officials, because they're usually the ones, at least with the property tax, that are causing the pain that you feel. And so they need to hear from you too. I think it's just people get busy, they have families to feed. We understand that. We try to make it as easy on you as possible. It's just a couple clicks to send an email to your legislator about an issue you care about, but that goes a long way because they do listen to you. You are their constituents and they represent you. And so making your voice heard, even if it's just once every couple of months, through an email or a text, is extraordinarily important. And it's certainly better than doing nothing at all.
Thank you, Justin. Patrick.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of an awareness thing. Like Justin mentioned, I don't want, I would never assign homework because I think a normal, healthy lifestyle involves not having to keep track of what the legislature is doing every day. That said, the old saying, just because you don't take an interest in politics doesn't mean politics won't take an interest in you. So you do need to have a base level of awareness of what's going on. I mean, I've always been surprised where, I remember at New Year's Day last year when a business owner I saw, you were saying Happy New Year, and I said, hey, how about the income tax cut that just took effect in North Carolina that day? And he had no idea, and I couldn't believe it. But then I realized, I might sound like a broken record to myself about this, but most people are too busy, and understandably so, good for them, to pay attention to this stuff. So, it's one, groups like my own need to do more to educate folks. But in terms of the public awareness, is just staying aware. And a lot of it's just signing up for regular emails from like groups like Beacon Center. Also, my own group, atr.org, but certainly like Beacon Center in particular, can keep you updated on what's going on, know who your state legislator is, and especially as we're getting into an election year, so much of the news is just focused on the national races and what's going on in Washington, D.C., where they don't give the attention to the things that affect people more immediately, what's going on in the General Assembly in Nashville or in their city council. And that's why, given there's going to be all that more noise, unfortunately, it's incumbent upon people to be more proactive, to stay aware. But the good news is there's entities that can save you time so you don't have to be on it every day. So sign up for Beacon's email list, check their website periodically, check your state chambers, website, what they're keeping attention to. In general, those can bring you up to speed pretty quickly on the news. So yeah, it really is kind of an awareness thing.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm not going to plug us, but I'll take any plug that you're willing to give us. Carey, bring us home. How would you advise people to get and stay involved?
Yeah, I would say that, certainly get in touch with your council members, get in touch with your state legislators. Don't be afraid to email them. Don't be afraid to email them a lot and then express your true opinion. Um, you know, the thing about something with this property tax and with professional taxes, these are nonpartisan issues. And so don't be afraid to have healthy debate discussions with your friends, with your family to say, hey, look, because what you get, and when I wrote the letter last time was, well, he just doesn't want to pay his fair share. He's a greedy business owner, and the comeback ought not be that I have a fight with somebody. It ought to be, well, what is my fair share? Can you define that? And have you talked with my employees? Because they're extremely happy. We treat them well, and so don't get mad at your opposition. Don't hate on them. Don't be ugly. Try and have healthy debates with rational people to say, hey, look, I get that you love taxes. You seem to just want to pay all you can. But have you paid extra? Do you pay what I pay? And what is a fair share for a small business owner who has invested in the community and built up a neighborhood that was blighted so you don't have to drive through a crappy part of town anymore? And I think those discussions do resonate with people, and they will listen if you're rational, if you're not ugly, and if you have a good argument. So know your facts and make sure that you know how to explain it to them. And just like I explained with the G bid or with the central business district for downtown, hey, no, you've got that fact wrong, or that person wrote about it wrong. Here's what actually happens. And so don't take the position that you're taking. Know that they actually pay extra for those extra services. Those are the types of things that I think that you can do. But don't be afraid to make your voice heard. Sometimes it hurts. I have felt the brunt of a lot of it. Looking at Reddit one afternoon with 400 negative comments. Don't do that. So try and stay positive and try and lift up your local business owners and your fellow citizens by saying, let's all be rational. We used to have a very nonpartisan city that got along great and was very fiscally responsible, and it was the best for everybody. And that's what we really want here. What's good for every citizen of Nashville, not just one group or the other.
Can't think of a better way to end this than on the note of civility. Talk to your neighbors and make your voice heard. A few thank yous before we go. Thank you to Justin, Carey, and Patrick for coming on and sharing all this information with us. If you're attending right now, you'll get an email with some of the links that we talked about in this, including one of our newest policy brief at Beacon, written by my colleague Jason Edmonds about property taxes, kind of explaining it and breaking some of that down and getting into some of those nuances that we'll be sending out to you. Big shout out to Jason for his work on that. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for being part of this and for issuing a call to action. And I hope that, at least on my end, we see more engagement on these issues, even though taxes are sometimes hard to wrap our minds around. They affect all of us. And so I really appreciate you guys weighing in on this and engaging with us. And with that, we will end it. If we don't see you guys before Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you soon.